What's going on there, YouTube, and welcome back to another comic book video. Okay, guys, so we are basically going to continue our coverage over Supreme Power. Now, remember, Supreme Power is basically a retelling of the origin of the Squadron Supreme. And let me explain. So back in the 1960s, Marvel gave us this question, which was, what would happen if the Avengers fought against the Justice League? Now, unfortunately for Marvel, they couldn't use the characters. And so what they did was they created a new team called the Squadron Supreme. Now, they come from an alternate universe, but basically these characters represent characters from DC Comics. So Hyperion is Superman, Blur is Flash, Nighthawk is Batman. Now, ever since the 1960s, you did have different versions of these characters that would just pop up left and right to fight against the Avengers, to basically say what would happen if the Avengers fought against the Justice League. Now, that went on for years and years and years. And like I said, there have been different versions of those characters. But then in the early 2000s, Marvel launched Marvel Max. Now, Marvel Max was a way for Marvel to do more adult comics, more graphic comics, like Punisher Max, for example. Now, with that being said, they also gave us Supreme Power, and they hired the writer known as JMS, who basically wrote Spider-Man in the early 2000s, to come over and work on this series as well, to retell the origin of the Squadron Supreme. Now, like I said earlier, though, there have been different versions of this team throughout the years of Marvel Comics. And so when it came to Supreme Power, it was a somewhat popular series. It had a couple spinoffs and a sequel series as well. But once everything was basically done, you didn't have Marvel say, oh yeah, this is just another version of the team out there in Marvel's multiverse. And so when you're reading Supreme Power, you're reading the early 2000 version of these characters. Now, so far, we have covered Supreme Power Volume 1, Dr. Spectrum miniseries, and we also covered the first half of Supreme Power Volume 2. Now, in today's video, we're going to cover the second half of Supreme Power Volume 2. Now, each of these videos have been used to kind of introduce basically a different character on the Squadron Supreme. So far, we met Hyperion, Blur, Nighthawk, Dr. Spectrum, but now it's time for us to meet another character. And that character will be Zarda, our power princess. And of course, as you all know, she represents Diana, aka Wonder Woman. Now, I do want to mention one thing. When it comes to Marvel Max, like I said earlier, it was a more graphic comic book line. So, of course, it had some naked people in the books. And so in this video, you might see some things kind of cut off or some weird skips, because a lot of these pages in this story right here were just filled with naked women left and right. And of course, I cannot show those naked women on YouTube. So you might see a lot of different skips and cuts because I had to basically make sure I don't break any rules with YouTube. So now this video right here is going to give you the origin of Power Princess or Zarda, which is basically the Squadron Supreme version of Wonder Woman. Now, getting into today's video, it does pick up where our last video left off at. Now, with that being said, remember, at the end of our last video, Hyperion found out that basically he is an alien, because remember, he does represent Superman in this comic book series. And so with that, his origin is very similar to Superman in some ways, but also different, because when it came to Hyperion, once he crashed on Earth, of course, he was taken in by a couple, but that couple was stopped by the military. And then they took Hyperion and began the process of trying to turn him into a military weapon. Now, with all that being said, though, Hyperion found out in our last video that he is not human, that he's not American at all, that basically he is an alien. And so he's wondering why the general, somebody he looked up to, was lying to him this entire time. Now, you do have the general basically say, you're a weapon. You're not human. You're not one of us. And so, of course, it kind of hurt the feelings of Hyperion. Now, when Hyperion did confront the general at the end of our last video, we came to find out that the general knew that nothing on Earth could technically stop Hyperion. And so he created a more powerful bomb than a nuclear bomb, hoping that it would actually defeat Hyperion. When that bomb went off, well, we come to find out in this video right here, Hyperion survived. He basically survived, and he's right now hiding out in a cave just trying to recover after being hit with that bomb. But it's also him wondering what to do next with his life, because right now he just realized that his entire life was a complete lie, that he's not human. He's not American. He never had parents. The military never liked him. They basically just used him as a military weapon. But then we jump over to a random location. Now, this random location is going to begin the process of us learning about Power Princess. Now, remember, Power Princess is basically the character who represents Wonder Woman in this comic book series. Now, with that being said, though, we actually pick up with a father and a son who are right now walking down into some kind of tomb. Now, in this tomb, a princess has been buried here. And every few days, months, years, whatever, they have to leave food in this tomb to basically feed the princess. Now, the father, we actually seen him earlier in this series, way back when Hyperion first crashed on Earth. It was a way for JMS to say, here are the different characters you're going to see down the road. And the princess was one of them. She's been buried in this tomb for so many years. But when the father was a boy, he did hear her speak and wonder if there was an actual princess down there. Now, as time went on, he basically grew up and had his own son. And so right now they're going down into this tomb once again to basically feed the princess for the grandmother of the family, because originally she was the one who was doing it. But of course, she's too old to keep walking down those steps in the tomb and walk back up. Now, you do have the father go ahead and send his son back up to be with the grandmother to basically go ahead and leave because the boy was getting bored. But while you have the dad staying down there, he does hear the voice again like he did so many years ago. The problem was, though, this time he is confronted by the princess. Yes, Zarda herself. Now, unfortunately, I cannot show you her in this section because, again, there was a lot of nudity. She was naked when she came out of the tomb. But then she does attack the father. And when she does, we come to find out that basically when she attacks somebody, she's draining their life energy to make herself young again. Because when she came out of that tomb, she looked really old. And so she killed off the father to get some life back into her body. And so she does look mostly young. Now, after Zarda comes out of the tomb, she is confronted by the grandmother of the family. Now, you do have the grandmother basically tell Zarda that your name is Zarda, you are the champion of the women, and you need to go out there and help save man's world, because right now, man's world is just falling apart. It's an all-time low. Now, for Zarda, though, even though she now remembers her name, she looks at her hair and she realized that she has some gray hair, which means that the life energy that she had absorbed from the father earlier in this section right here did not give her enough life into her body. And so she's kind of like, oh, I look young, but I have gray hair, which means I'm not young enough and hot enough yet. So I'm going to go ahead and absorb more life energy. And so she goes ahead and kills off the grandma as well to show that Zarda does not care about people's lives at all. On top of that, she's not here to fix man's world. And on top of that, she's basically realizing that somebody out there needs her help. And that right there is very important, because what really brought her back to life was not the food or anything. It was the idea that she sensed that somebody's in serious pain and they need her help. And so she leaves to find that person. Now, we actually do pick up with Dr. Spectrum. Now, remember, Dr. Spectrum is basically the Green Lantern of the series. Now, with that being said, though, in our last video, he fought against Hyperion and lost that battle. Now, after losing that battle, we had no idea what had actually happened to Dr. Spectrum. The only thing we knew that he had just disappeared after losing to Hyperion. Well, he went to the bottom of the ocean, and then the crystal had basically put him inside some kind of cocoon. Now remember, the crystal was the power source to the spaceship that had brought Hyperion to Earth. But the military want to learn more about the crystal, and so they ran tests on the crystal by using Joseph Ledger, which then led into the crystal being embedded in the hand of Joseph Ledger. Now, with all that being said, the crystal took Joseph to the bottom of the ocean and put him inside a cocoon to help heal him up. Now, when he does wake up, he is confronted by Amphibian. Now, remember, Amphibian is basically the Aqua Woman of the series. Either way, though, her origin is that when she was, before she was born, her mom was excited to give birth to her very soon. But then her mom saw the spaceship of Hyperion. Now, when the spaceship flew over the mother of Amphibian, something happened. Something changed with Amphibian when the spaceship flew over her. And so with that, when the mom gave birth to Amphibian, well, of course, she came out looking different, like a creature. And that right there freaked the mom out. And so the mom killed herself. And then the dad freaked out because the baby seemed to be, a monster. And the baby left into the ocean. Now, of course, because she was born in the ocean technically, and she never had anybody to talk to at all, she's unable to actually communicate with Dr. Spectrum. But for him, he's kind of like, okay, here is this random naked blue lady in front of me, and I have no idea how to communicate with her, but I can tell there's some kind of human side to her. And you can tell that she's kind of lonely and she needs a friend. But then he realized that he has been gone for so long that he has to go back to the military base. But he promised her that he'll be back. And when he does come back, he'll be able to give her an actual name. But then we actually jump back over to Zarda. Now remember, Zarda said earlier that somebody out there needs her help. Somebody is in pain and they're calling out for help. And that person was Hyperion. And so you have Zarda find Hyperion. She picks him up. They fly in the sky together and then she kisses him. Now, the reason why she does kiss him is because it's a way for her to actually heal him up, to make him better again. And so Hyperion is now fully recovered. But the question is, though, why was she called here to him? Why was she sensing him for? What is their connection? Because she just came back to the world of the living and she realized that he needed help. What is so special about him that she had to go and find him? Now, we actually do pick back up with Dr. Spectrum. Now, you do have Dr. Spectrum basically coming back to where you had the general try to use that really powerful bomb on Hyperion, and of course, it failed. Now, with that being said, you do have somebody asking Dr. Spectrum to basically use the crystal to figure out where in the world Hyperion is actually at. Now, the reason why they're asking him to do that with the crystal is because, remember, the crystal was the power source to Hyperion's spaceship that had basically brought him here to Earth. And so really you have this guy telling Dr. Spectrum to use the crystal to hopefully locate Hyperion. Now at first you have Dr. Spectrum kind of playing around because he thinks that idea is really stupid, but then you have the crystal actually take over his mind. Now this is actually very important because we saw this back in the mini-series we covered for Dr. Spectrum, but also in the earlier books of Supreme Power, where basically sometimes the crystal is, well, how to say this? Basically, the crystal is another personality in the mind of Dr. Spectrum. And so you do have a character who does have multiple personalities, but one of those personalities really comes from the crystal. Now, you do have the crystal takes over Dr. Spectrum's body and actually takes them to a location where when they get to that location, you have Dr. Spectrum say they're not alone. They were never alone. Now, with that line right there, we have no idea what he means by that, but it's going to be somewhat important for later chapters down the road. Either way, when you have the crystal basically give the body back over to Dr. Spectrum to control, you do have Dr. Spectrum say, hey, I need some help out here, some high-tech military gear. But the guy on his radio say, dude, where'd you go? You went radio silence for 10 whole minutes, which means that when the crystal had taken over his body, it was 10 whole minutes where basically the crystal had complete control over Dr. Spectrum's body. But then we actually jump back over to Zarda and Hyperion. Now, this is Zarda basically telling the origin of her and Hyperion, telling us where they actually came from. Now, I'm going to say right now, this origin is partially wrong. Not partially, mostly wrong. Not mostly. Yeah, I say partially. It's partially wrong. And the reason why, because Zarda been asleep for so long that there is some key information that she has forgotten about, but also there is some information that she's getting confused about. Now, what she tells Hyperion is this right here. Thousands and thousands of years ago, you basically had this alien race that was traveling through space. Now, this alien race that was traveling through space was sending kids across the universe. Now, when they did that, though, they only sent 2 kids to each particular planet. So right now, you're probably wondering, okay, for Earth, those 2 kids were Hyperion and Zarda. But you have to remember, though, that this part of the story takes place thousands of years ago, and Hyperion only came about 20 years ago. So again, this is why I say Zarda's origins kind of a little bit confusing. Either way, though, what she says this right here. While this alien race was sending kids to different parts of the universe, they were also being attacked by another unknown alien race. Now, the 2 kids who were sent to Earth were actually both boys, brothers, and these brothers became the god of war and the god of night. Now, we're left to believe that basically this is Marvel saying that the Greek gods in this universe are really more aliens who came from space, who crashed on Earth. And the reason why they are gods is because the powers they had. Now, with that being said, though, another war had broke out between these guys from all the different planets across the universe. And the reason why, because you had gods going to these planets and beginning to breed with the regular people of those planets. So, for example, the god of war and god of night came to Earth and began to, of course, have, fun time with the regular people of Earth, which of course led to children being born. And that was a huge no-no. And so you had some gods who felt like that the offsprings of the other gods should be killed off because, again, they broke a big rule. Now, with this war breaking out, you had the god of war and the god of night basically say, okay, it's time for us to send our youngest kids away so that they would not be consumed by the war. And so the god of night, which is Zarda's father, he has sent his child, Zarda, in the ground. And the god of war, Hyperion's father, sent his child into space. Now again, though, with this origin story, there are some parts that are correct and other parts that are particularly wrong. But you didn't have Zarda say that they were originally sent here to Earth to conquer Earth. And so it's her saying that it's now up to her and Hyperion to basically conquer the Earth. But then we actually jump over to Kyle Richmond and also Stanley Stewart. Now remember, Stanley Stewart is Blur, and Blur is basically the Flash in this comic book series. And Kyle Richmond is Nighthawk, which is Batman. Now right now you have Kyle Richmond, who's the Batman of this universe, actually donating money to Blur's foundation, because you have to remember that when Blur basically came out to the public, and the reason why he did come out to the public with his powers, which was some agents were able to figure out who he was, that he was the guy running around South part of America with super speed. And so what they said was, if you basically help promote these companies across America, you'll basically get a lot of money. But on top of that, you can also be a hero. But at the same time, while you're being a hero, you are also promoting these companies who are promoting you. And so for the last couple, months, years, whatever, he has been a hero who has been promoting companies, but at the same time, still being a hero somewhat. Now, you have Nighthawk right now being Kyle Richmond and being a rich person, donating money to Blur's foundation to kind of help out with some different things. But then you have Nighthawk ask Blur to talk in private later on in the night. Now, this conversation is really more of Nighthawk telling Blur that he's actually very upset with Blur. And the reason why, because both of them being black men, it's Nighthawk feeling like Blur is not doing anything to help out the black community. Now, you do have Blur trying to explain things to Nighthawk that with them kind of being under multiple contracts from different companies that he is promoting, there are some things he can't just actually do so freely. Even though that means him being a hero, he can only be a hero at certain times. But for Nighthawk, he's kind of like, you're failing the black community, because with your powers and who you are, you should be out there helping the black community. Now, this is something I want you guys to remember. When it came to Nighthawk, his parents were killed by racist people. And so ever since then, when he became Nighthawk officially, at night, he would go out and help only black people, no one else. So if you are Caucasian, you were basically being helpless. You were not going to be helped at all. He will leave you there to, well, die or get hurt. And I want to say other races as well, but I could be wrong. Either way, though, this is Nighthawk saying that I'm going to give you a chance to basically help your black community out more and stop wasting your powers and your potential by doing these things for these different companies. And so you have Nighthawk leave, but as he does leave, he does hand Blur a piece of card. And of course, it has his logo on there, but it's Nighthawk saying, find me and we'll work together on something really important. But then we actually pick up with Nighthawk and Blur. Now, you do have Nighthawk and Blur actually going to a certain crime scene. Now, this crime scene is going to give us the first actual villain of the Squadron Supreme universe. But on top of that, though, it is going to wrap up Volume 2, but lead us into Volume 3. Now, with that being said, though, what's happening right now is that you have Nighthawk and Blur going to this crime scene where apparently somebody is going around killing off black women. Now, these black women who are dying are part of sex work. And so still, though, for Nighthawk, because there are black women who are dying, he wants to step in because his black community is being attacked once again. Now, with that being said, when he does take Blur to that crime scene, he shows Blur the pile of arms that he had found. Now, at first, it was told to the public that the person who's going around doing this to black sex workers and basically taking their arms, that he cuts off their arms. But we kind of find out their arms are not getting cut off. Their arms are actually getting ripped off, which means that somebody has to have enough power to basically rip an arm off a body. And so this is Nighthawk kind of telling Blur there is a possibility that Hyperions doing this are somebody out there who has the same power set as Hyperion. Either way, Blur and Nighthawk must work together to basically stop this from continuing on. Now, the final chapter of today's video is actually going to jump between 4 different settings. So, for example, one setting is basically focusing on Hyperion and Zarda, where right now you have Hyperion wondering what he's going to do next with his life. Because right now he just found out that 1, he's an alien. 2, Zarda is part of his alien race. And 3, he just found out in the earlier chapters that basically the military, the people he looked as family and friends, had basically lied to him his entire life. And so he's wondering what's next for him in life. And so he does tell Zarda that he's going to go back home to basically think about all these different things and wonder what is the next step in his life. But on top of that, he does say that when the time comes, he'll call out for Zarda and they could continue to possibly work together or to try to do something new for the Earth. We have no idea yet. But basically, he does leave and she goes her own path as well. Now, the second setting picks up with Nighthawk and Blur. Now, Nighthawk and Blur are trying to figure out what to do. Like, are they actually going to try to figure out who is going around killing off these black sex workers? Now, at first, for Blur, he's kind of like, leave it to the police. They're already doing their jobs. But you have Nighthawk say, when it comes to sex workers and black people as well, the police are not going to give a you-know-what. And so it's Nighthawk saying, Blur, it's time for us black superheroes to actually step in, but we might need some extra help. And that help is Hyperion. And so what Nighthawk did, he basically put an ad out there calling out to Hyperion to say, hey, we need to talk because I have something to actually show you. Now, the third setting is Dr. Spectrum and Dr. Steedman. Now, remember, Dr. Steedman is the lead scientist for all the different projects that was going on with the military and different characters who were getting powers. Now, Dr. Steedman is wondering what happened to Dr. Spectrum earlier, because after his battle with Hyperion in our last video, he disappeared. And we know where he went to. He went to the bottom of the ocean. Now, when he was in the bottom of the ocean, he was confronted by another character. Now, that character is Amphibian. But of course, he does not tell Dr. Steedman about her because he is afraid that maybe the military go down there and try to grab her as well. Now, on top of that, you also have Dr. Steedman wondering, okay, well, where'd you go? You say we're at the bottom of the ocean, but why though? Like, was it the crystal? Was it you? Is the crystal basically taking over your body once again? And the reason why Dr. Steedman said that, because when the first time Dr. Spectrum popped back up with his power for the first time, his mind was not in control. His body was not in his control. It was the crystal had control over his mind and his body. And Dr. Steedman realized that basically when it comes to Dr. Spectrum, there's two minds in that one particular body. Now, the last setting is actually a random guy who lives out in the middle of the nowhere. And this is the way we're going to kind of get introduced to a new character. But this character does leave and he goes somewhere and we have no idea where he went to. Now, the second half of the last chapter continues the idea of jumping between 4 different settings, but the settings have now changed. Like, for example, the first one is Zarda. Now, you do see Zarda right now actually going to a nearby city because she wants to see how much the Earth has changed ever since she was asleep. Now, with that happening, of course, you're talking about the idea of a crazy woman who had just killed a father and a grandmother earlier just because she wants to make sure she looks young again, now going to a nearby city to just basically see like, oh, let's see how the Earth has changed ever since I was put to sleep. Now, with that being said, though, this is also her with the thought process that she was sent here to the Earth to basically conquer it. And so she thinks that no one has the right to control her. She has no idea that she needs to follow certain laws, because to her, the laws are basically pointless because she was sent here to basically do her own thing. And so you have her just go to this random town and begin the process of just, stealing things, taking things that she thinks belongs to her, and nobody can actually stop her. Now, in Chicago, you do have Hyperion actually meet up with Nighthawk, because remember, Nighthawk did put an ad out there calling out to Hyperion. Now, with this meeting happening, you do have Nighthawk basically tell Hyperion, hey man, listen. So basically what happened was there's someone out there with powers just like yours going out killing black sex workers and ripping off their arms. Now, at first, this is Nighthawk kind of wondering if it is Hyperion, even though we know it's not Hyperion, but Nighthawk doesn't know that. But now it's Hyperion wondering, did the military hide other projects from him? Because right now it seems like there could be somebody else out there with the same power set of Hyperion, which means that he could be an alien like Hyperion, or possibly have powers that are just as strong as Hyperion, but he is a regular human. Either way, though, is Hyperion telling Nighthawk, no, it's not me. It has to be somebody else. But I need to go and leave and confirm some different things to basically figure out what in the world is going on. Now, when Hyperion does leave, he does go to his apartment where basically he burns everything. And this is him saying that, okay, it's time for me to basically make my own path in life and not take any more orders or instructions or directions from anybody else at all. Now, you do have Nighthawk kind of mad at Hyperion because, of course, again, Hyperion is white and he does not like white people. Now, the third setting actually follows Dr. Steedman because in the first half, Dr. Spectrum realized that something is wrong with Helen. Helen is a doctor that works for Dr. Steedman at his facility. And so you had Steedman follow Helen to another facility. Now, this was a way for JMS, the writer of this book, to basically say that what Helen is actually doing is that she has been giving this other scientific group or this other military government group, whatever they called, a sample of the virus. Now, remember, back in the earlier chapters of Supreme Power, we learned that on the spaceship that had brought Hyperion to Earth, there were small containers, and these small containers were basically holding viruses that came from the alien race Hyperion came from. Now, most of those containers were empty. Now, some were not. And so what Helen did was she joined this group and they began to test different humans with this virus. Now, at first, they did test it on military people, and every single one they gave the virus to, they died. Now, they said they couldn't test animals for some unknown reason, I forgot, but then they said they went out of their way and started testing on military prisoners to basically say, like, these are folks who are in the military, but they have committed some crazy crimes, and so we used them instead and began to see what would happen if we gave them the virus. Would they gain powers? And this is how we get into the idea of our first supervillain, which also jumps into the fourth setting of this last chapter. Because remember, Nighthawk and Blur said that there's someone going out there killing black sex workers. And when they're out there doing that, they rip the arms off these black sex workers. And so what Dr. Helen is telling Dr. Steedman, and you do have Dr. Spectrum also appear to protect Dr. Steedman from this other group. But basically, what she tells him is that when they gave this sample out to the military prisoners, some of those prisoners got away. But one of them, he was a murderer, a big-time murderer, who actually did kill black sex workers before he was locked away. And so that means when he escaped, it would make sense that he would go back out into the world and do it all over again. But now he has powers now, it's more fun to him. And so the last setting, we do see another woman who had went to that house that's out in the middle of nowhere, and he had killed that woman and basically took her arm. And so it does lead us into the idea that basically we now have our first super villain. But now the heroes of Supreme Power must come together to basically stop this new super villain. But this is where we are going to end today's comic book video. So please leave me a like down below and subscribe. But guys, I'll see y'all next time. Later.